Hello and welcome to the SRS Podcast, Unmasking the World of Specialist Cleaning. I'm your host, and today we're digging into a subject that's not just close to home, quite literally, but also incredibly timely, deeply emotional for many, and essential for the planet. So let me start with a simple question. Have you ever had to clear out a house? Maybe a family member passed away, maybe you were preparing a property for sale or renting, or maybe, just maybe, you finally decided it was time to tackle that long forgotten loft or garage filled with everything from old VHS tapes to broken hoovers. Here's the thing, most people don't realize clearing a property isn't just about throwing things away. It's not just black bin bags and a trip to the tip. It's about deciding what gets a second life, what gets responsibly recycled, and yes, what unfortunately must be binned. But there's a far bigger story here about sustainability, regulation, care, and even compassion. Now, here's a stat to get us started. Each year in the UK alone, over 22 million pieces of furniture are discarded. That's sofas, tables, chairs, items that could often be reused, repurposed, or donated. And yet the vast majority end up in landfill. Why does this matter? Because the way we clear out homes, offices, and commercial spaces has a direct impact on our environment, our communities, and our mental well-being. In today's episode, Sustainable Clearance, Recycling and Reusing, we're going to unpack how a simple act like house clearance can actually become a powerful positive force when it's done properly. And of course, I'll show you exactly how we at SRS Specialist Remediation Solutions do just that. We're going to talk about what sustainable clearance actually means, not just the buzzwords, but the hands-on, boots on the ground work that goes into making sure your clearance job is not just efficient, but ethical, legal, and environmentally sound. We'll look at real-life stories from the field, times when a clearance job turned into something far more meaningful, whether it's recovering treasured belongings from a bereaved family's home or saving thousands of pounds worth of office furniture from ending up in landfill by finding it a new life elsewhere. We'll walk through the techniques we use, the sorting, the segregation, the recycling partnerships. I'll explain why it's not as simple as grabbing a skip and chucking everything in. Far from it. We'll get into the science a bit too. Yeah, I know science might not be the first thing you associate with clearance work, but stay with me. We're talking about material recovery, carbon impact, and even some surprising innovations that are shaping the future of how we deal with what we leave behind. And then we'll zoom out a little. Talk about the bigger picture, the lessons we learn from this work. Lessons about compassion, resilience, responsibility, and doing the right thing, even when it's not the easiest option. Because here's the truth, clearance is about people. Their stories, their things, their history, and how we handle that, especially in sensitive moments, says a lot about who we are as a society. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let me tell you a little bit about SRS. At Specialist Remediation Solutions, we specialize in more than just removals. We're not a man with a van, and we're definitely not your mate down the road with a tip-run offer. We deal with complex, emotional, and highly regulated scenarios, clearance, after bereavement, biohazard cleaning, hoarding cases, asbestos remediation, you name it, we've probably handled it. And crucially, we do it all with a foundation of compliance, compassion, and care. Every job is assessed for legal obligations under UK waste management laws. Every item is categorized based on the waste hierarchy, and every person we help is treated with dignity, whether it's a landlord, a council, or a grieving family member. We're also a registered waste carrier, which, if you didn't know, is a legal requirement here in the UK. If your clearance provider can't show you their waste carrier license, they're not just cutting corners, they're putting you at risk of prosecution. More on that later. So why are we talking about sustainable clearance right now? Well, two reasons. First, the climate crisis. We're all being asked to rethink how we consume, discard, and reuse. And that starts at home sometimes, quite literally in the home we're clearing. Second, the rise in unregulated operators. Fly tipping is on the rise. Councils across the UK are cracking down, and people are being fined hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds because they trusted the wrong person to handle their clearance. And third, because it's deeply human. Behind every house clearance is a story, an ending, a beginning, a transition. These aren't just items being thrown away, they're moments, memories, and materials with value. Sometimes financial, often emotional, occasionally both. So whether you're a homeowner downsizing, a facilities manager handling end of lease transitions, or a letting agent prepping a property for new tenants, this episode is for you. If you care about the environment, if you want to avoid the legal traps, and if you believe, like we do, that clearance can be handled with integrity and kindness, then stick with me. And just before we dive into our first section, let me give you a quick heads up. Everything we talk about today, including legal references, tips, and tools, can be found over at srsolutions.uk. That's our hub for helpful resources, guides, and all the services we offer. All right. So what exactly is sustainable clearance? Why should you care? And what does it look like when it's done properly? So let's get right to it. What actually is sustainable clearance? Now, at first glance, the term might sound a bit fluffy, maybe even a bit trendy. You might think it just means using a few more recycling bins or donating the odd item to charity. But in reality, sustainable clearance is a strategic, thoughtful approach to clearing properties, whether it's homes, offices, or entire commercial buildings, with a clear goal: to reuse and recycle wherever possible, minimize landfill waste, and meet all legal and environmental responsibilities. It's a service that blends logistics, legislation, environmental science, and human care, all wrapped up in what looks like, from the outside, just another clearance van pulling up outside someone's home. But when you strip it back, sustainable clearance is based on a very simple principle: waste has value. Not just monetary value, but environmental, social, and even emotional value. The sofa left behind after a tenant moves out, that could help a struggling family furnish their flat. The wardrobe from a bereavement property, it could be restored and sold to raise funds for a local hospice. Even the broken items, the rusty bed frame, the cracked TV unit, many of these can be stripped for parts, recycled, or repurposed. Here in the UK, this isn't just a feel-good approach, it's backed by law. Let's talk about the Waste England and Wales Regulations 2011. This legislation introduced the concept of the waste hierarchy, a kind of moral and legal compass for how we manage waste. It tells us to follow a specific order. First, prevent waste, then prepare for reuse, then recycle, then recover energy. And finally, if there's no other option, dispose. What that means is you can't just take everything to landfill as your first step. In fact, you're legally required to show that you've taken reasonable steps to avoid landfill where possible. And at SRS, we take that responsibility seriously. Let's say we're clearing a flat after a long-term tenant has moved on. Under these regulations, we must do everything we reasonably can to avoid simply binning the contents. That might mean working with reuse charities, checking furniture for fire safety labels so it can be donated, or using all our authorized recycling centers for white goods and electronics. If we cut corners, if we just chucked everything into a skip and sent it off to landfill, we could be fined. And more importantly, so could you. Yep, this is where it gets real. Because as the producer of the waste, that is the property owner, landlord, or agent, you carry what's called a duty of care under the Environmental Protection Act 1990. You're legally responsible for making sure your waste is handled properly, right up until it's fully and legally disposed of. And if you use an unlicensed waste carrier, or fail to get the right paperwork like a waste transfer note, and that waste ends up dumped in a lay-by or fly-tipped on someone's land, you could be facing prosecution, not just the company you hired. That's why choosing a clearance provider isn't just about cost or convenience. It's about compliance, protection, and ethics. So when we say sustainable clearance, we're not just talking about ticking a few recycling boxes. We're talking about a full end-to-end process, assessing the contents of a property for what can be reused. Sorting materials at source, that means separating metal, textiles, electricals, wood, general waste, and hazardous items on site. Working with licensed partners from local charities to recycling firms, and documenting everything so you've got a clear audit trail showing your legal compliance. We're also talking about thinking long term. Sustainable clearance means asking questions like, what's the carbon footprint of this job? Can we reduce transport emissions by using local reuse networks? Are there items that could support someone in need rather than going to waste? Because in our experience, most people don't want to just throw everything away. They want to know that their loved one's belongings or their former tenant's furniture or even just their own surplus stuff is going to be used again, if at all possible. And that's where we come in. At SRS, we've built our processes around these principles. Every clearance begins with a site assessment. We're looking not just at access and logistics, but also the materials involved. We ask the questions others don't. What can be saved? What can be donated? What needs specialist handling? And when something does need to go to landfill, we make sure it's the last resort and that it's handled by an authorized waste management facility with all the correct paperwork in place. That's what makes clearance sustainable. Not just the items you save, but the intention, the planning, the care, and the compliance that goes into doing it right. And in just a moment, I'm going to take you through some powerful real-life stories that show how these ideas work in the real world, stories of grief, generosity, and even surprising treasures uncovered during clearance work. But before we do that, let me leave you with this thought. If your clearance provider isn't talking to you about reuse, recycling, and your legal obligations, are they really looking after you? Right. Let's move into some of the most powerful and eye-opening stories we've encountered. Let's face it, when most people think of house clearance, they imagine a van turning up, a team hauling out old furniture, and the whole lot being thrown into a skip. But in reality, it's often far more emotional, far more nuanced. And when done right, it can be far more meaningful than you might expect. Let me take you through a few real life examples, moments where clearance wasn't just about removing clutter, but about preserving dignity, creating value, and even changing lives. An estate in Bedfordshire. We got a call from a family who had just lost their elderly mother. She'd lived in her Bedfordshire home for nearly 60 years. Every room was full, not in a hoarding sense, just full of memories. Cupboards stacked with neatly folded linen, drawers brimming with old letters, boxes of family photos, furniture dating back decades. The family were overwhelmed. They wanted the house cleared so it could go on the market, but they couldn't face doing it themselves. And they didn't want everything simply thrown away. They asked us, can you do this gently? Now, that might sound like an odd word for a clearance job, but for us, it made perfect sense. We took a methodical approach. We catalogued key belongings, especially personal effects like photographs and documents. We offered to return items of sentimental value and stored them in clearly labeled containers. We checked every item of furniture for donation potential: sofas with the right fire safety tags, wardrobes in decent condition, electronics that passed our safety checks. In the end, over 60% of the contents were either reused or donated. The furniture went to a local homeless charity that helps people furnish temporary accommodation. The books went to a community library, the clothes to a women's refuge. The family kept a few precious things, her favourite armchair, some framed photographs, and a collection of handwritten recipes. And here's the thing they told us afterwards. We thought this was going to be heartbreaking, but you helped us say goodbye with dignity. That's what sustainable clearance looks like. Student property in Manchester. Now let's shift gears. A completely different type of job, but equally impactful. This was a multi-occupancy student house in Manchester, end of the academic year. 5 tenants had moved out in a hurry, leaving behind mattresses, broken furniture, bin bags of old clothes, and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since Freshers' Week. The landlord called us in a panic. He had new tenants arriving in less than a week, and the property was a tip. Now, a lot of clearance firms would have just hired a skip, dumped the lot, and called it a day, but we had other ideas. We deployed a 2-person team with a van that same afternoon. They sorted waste into categories: metals, wood, general waste, electricals, and took photos for the landlord's records. We salvaged 4 beds with perfectly usable frames, cleaned them down, and kept them in storage for future rehoming. Unopened tinned food from the cupboards was donated to a local food bank. Clothes went to a community centre. Within 48 hours, the property was fully cleared, professionally cleaned, and ready for new tenants. And best of all, we kept over 85% of the material out of landfill. The landlord later told us, "I didn't even know you could recycle most of that stuff. I thought it was all rubbish." And that's the key. Most people don't realize how much hidden value is in the things we leave behind. A hoarding case in Kent. This one's close to my heart. We were contacted by an adult social care team about a gentleman in Kent, let's call him George, who was struggling with hoarding. He'd lived in the same house for over 40 years and due to a mix of trauma and isolation, had gradually filled the entire space with belongings. Not rubbish per se, just things. Newspapers, tools, furniture, gadgets, even old garden equipment stacked in the living room. It had reached a crisis point. There were concerns about fire hazards, trip hazards, hygiene. George needed help, but understandably, he was anxious, embarrassed, and very protective of his possessions. Now, this wasn't a job for a skip and a broom. It required care, collaboration, and time. We worked with George and his support workers over several visits. Each session lasted a few hours, never more than he could emotionally manage. He was part of the decision-making. We helped him identify what to keep, what to let go of, and what could find a new home. One afternoon, buried under piles of papers, we found an old box of camera equipment, vintage lenses, rare film rolls, even a Leica body. We cleaned it up, took it to a local dealer, and found out it was worth nearly £3,000. George decided to sell the kit, and he donated the proceeds to a local animal shelter. He loved cats. By the end of the process, the house was safe, clear, and livable again. But more than that, George felt heard, respected, not bulldozed or judged. That, again, is what we mean by sustainable. It's not just about the environment, it's about the people involved. Office strip out in London. Lastly, a more commercial example, but one with huge sustainability impact. We were hired by a company in central London, downsizing from 2 floors of office space to just 1 due to changes in hybrid working. They had over 100 desks, dozens of chairs, partitions, filing cabinets, and kitchen appliances, all in decent condition. The easy option? A bulk removal, a few skips, straight to waste. But instead, we proposed something different. We arranged for the bulk of the furniture to be donated to a school charity in Essex that supports educational facilities in developing countries. We coordinated all logistics, loaded and transported the items over the course of a weekend. What couldn't be donated was recycled. We even repurposed old whiteboards into community art projects. All in, we avoided nearly 3 tons of landfill. The client received full documentation, tax-deductible donation receipts, and a sustainability report they included in their ESG statement. So even in a corporate context, the impact was very human. You see, sustainable clearance isn't about being perfect, it's about being thoughtful. And with the right processes, the right team, and a little creativity, it's amazing what you can achieve. Coming up next, I'm going to take you behind the scenes into the tools, techniques, and systems that make all of this possible. You'll hear about the equipment we use, the checks we carry out, and the safety protocols that ensure compliance every step of the way. So far, we've talked about the heart of sustainable clearance, the people, the stories, the social impact. But now let's get into the nuts and bolts of how we actually deliver these results on the ground. Because here's the truth. Sustainable clearance doesn't just happen by accident. It takes planning, proper kit, trained staff, and a system that works every time, no matter the size of the property or the complexity of the job. Let's start with the basics. When we arrive on site, whether that's a 2-bed bungalow, a high-rise flat, or a commercial unit, we're arriving with more than just a van and a broom. Our clearance teams come fully equipped with segregation crates and color-coded bins. These are key. We use clearly labeled containers to sort items by material type: wood, metal, plastic, textiles, WEEE waste. That's waste electrical and electronic equipment and general waste. This ensures everything is handled correctly from the moment it leaves the room. PAT testing equipment. PAT stands for Portable Appliance Testing, and it's how we check electrical items to see if they're safe to donate. You can't legally pass on a secondhand toaster or lamp to a charity without this check. We're trained and equipped to carry out these tests on site. Lifting gear, trolleys, dollies, furniture straps, you name it, moving bulky furniture through narrow hallways or down tight staircases isn't just a logistical challenge, it's a safety issue. Proper manual handling techniques and equipment protect both our team and the property. PPE, that's personal protective equipment. We kit our teams out with gloves, steel-toe boots, high-vis vests, and face masks where needed, especially important if we're dealing with dust, allergens, or potential biohazards like old fridges or damp materials. Digital inventory systems. This might sound high-tech, but it's really about transparency and efficiency. We use software to log what's being removed, where it's going, and whether it's being reused, recycled, or disposed of. Clients receive full reports with photos ideal for landlords, estate executors, or corporate compliance. But the gear is only half the story. The technique matters just as much. Let me walk you through a standard SRS clearance process. Step 1, pre-clearance assessment. We begin with a site visit or a remote assessment. This isn't just about quoting for cost. It's where we identify what needs specialist handling, where we'll need extra equipment, and which items can potentially be diverted from waste. We also check for hazards, sharps, mold, asbestos risks, even signs of pest activity. If any red flags pop up, we escalate to our specialist teams. Step 2, segregation at source. This is critical. Items are not just thrown into one big pile we sort as we go. If we're clearing a kitchen, for example, the cutlery might be boxed for donation, the broken kettle separated as WEEE waste, and the mouldy microwave bagged for disposal under COSHH rules if it's contaminated. Why sort on site? Because mixing waste types makes recycling impossible. Once it's all in one heap, it's game over for sustainability. We do the hard work up front, not after the fact. Step 3, transport and documentation. Once items are loaded, we issue a waste transfer note. This is a legal requirement in the UK under the Environmental Protection Act 1990. It proves that you've passed your waste to a registered carrier. We include detailed notes on the contents and destination. For electrical items, we include PAT test results. For hazardous waste, like fridges containing refrigerants, we provide evidence that they're being sent to an authorized facility. We also give you copies of our Environment Agency waste carrier license, just in case you need to show it to a council inspector or your insurance provider. Step 4, ethical disposal. This is where our network comes in. We've partnered with charities, recycling facilities, and reuse hubs across the country. That means your old desk could end up in a school. Your sofa could help a family escaping domestic violence. Your wardrobe could be refurbished by a local upcycler. Anything that can't be reused is sent to authorized recycling centers, where materials are separated, shredded, and processed into raw resources. Very little goes to landfill. And when it does, it's fully traceable and legally compliant. Health and safety protocols. Now, I want to talk briefly about safety because clearance work, when done wrong, can be dangerous. Manual handling regulations. 1992 mean that we must assess the risk of lifting heavy items and use equipment or team lifting where necessary. Control of substances. Hazardous to health. COSHH. 2002 comes into play when dealing with items contaminated by mold, bodily fluids, or harsh chemicals. We don't take chances. We isolate and remove these items using sealed bags and appropriate PPE. Display screen equipment, even monitors must be handled properly under WEEE regulations. You can't just toss a TV in the skip and hope for the best. It's illegal and it's bad for the environment. Every one of our operatives is trained not just in how to lift a sofa or pack a van, but in how to do it safely, ethically, and legally. Client communication. Finally, we make sure our clients are involved and informed throughout. Whether it's a simple one-day job or a multi-week phased clearance, we provide updates, photos, and end-of-job summaries. And let me tell you, when clients see a report that says 82% of contents were diverted from landfill, it means something. It means they've done the right thing, they've complied with the law, and they've contributed to a better outcome for someone else. That's the power of proper technique and the difference between ticking a box and truly doing the job right. Coming up next, I'll take you deeper into the science behind what we do, from how certain materials are broken down to why reusing an old wardrobe might do more good than you ever imagined. Now, let's pull back the curtain a bit and dive into something you might not expect in an episode about clearance work science. Yes, science. Because behind every item we remove, behind every decision to recycle, reuse, or discard, there's a chain reaction of environmental consequences. And understanding that chain helps explain why sustainable clearance is so much more than just tidying up. Let's start with a deceptively simple question. What happens when you throw something away? Truth is, there's no such place as away. Everything we dispose of ends up somewhere. And depending on how it's handled, it can either become part of a circular economy or a contributor to our growing landfill crisis. The life cycle of household items. Take a basic item, an old wooden chair. If we chuck it into landfill, it'll break down anaerobically, that is, without oxygen, which creates methane, one of the most potent greenhouse gases. According to DEFRA, methane is over 25 times more harmful than carbon dioxide when it comes to trapping heat in the atmosphere. But if we repurpose that chair, maybe donate it to a local charity shop or upcycle it into shelving, it stays in use. It doesn't emit anything. And we don't need to chop down more trees to make a new one. That's carbon saving in action. Now multiply that by hundreds of items per clearance job and thousands of clearance jobs a year, and the potential environmental savings are massive. Material science at play. Let's talk materials for a second. Metals like steel and aluminium can be melted down and reused almost indefinitely. Recycling aluminium, for instance, uses 95% less energy than creating new aluminium from raw materials. Textiles, clothing, curtains, upholstery can be shredded and reused as insulation, soundproofing material, or even stuffing for new furniture. Electronics are full of valuable materials: gold, copper, rare earth elements. When processed properly, these can be extracted and reused. When binned irresponsibly, they leach toxic substances like lead, mercury, and cadmium into the soil and groundwater. Plastics can often be recycled, but they must be separated by type PET, HDPE, polystyrene. If they're mixed, contaminated, or improperly sorted, they're likely to be rejected by recycling facilities and end up incinerated or landfilled. This is why on-site segregation, as I mentioned earlier, is so important, because the science tells us that what we do in the first hour of clearance affects what happens over the next 100 years. The carbon footprint conversation. We also look at clearance through the lens of carbon impact. Transport, for instance, is a big one. That's why at SRS, we optimize van routes, batch multiple jobs together, and work with local recycling centers to minimize vehicle miles. We also offer carbon-saving reports to clients who want to see the tangible environmental benefits of their clearance decisions. These include estimates based on DEFRA's published emissions factors, so clients can see, for instance, that by reusing rather than replacing 10 office desks, they've avoided X kilos of CO2. And those numbers matter, especially for organizations looking to hit ESG targets or individuals who simply want to tread more lightly on the planet. Innovations in sustainable clearance. The science of waste is evolving quickly, and we're embracing that change. We've started trialing AI-based sorting tools, cameras that identify materials on the fly, helping us speed up segregation and improve accuracy. Smart donation apps are now connecting us directly with charities in need of specific items. So instead of warehousing usable furniture, we can deliver it exactly where it's needed, almost in real time. We're also exploring material passports, digital labels for furniture that provide info on its materials and disassembly methods. These help recyclers reclaim more components and reduce unnecessary waste. The future of clearance is smarter, leaner, more transparent, and more connected. Micro impacts, macro results. But let's bring it back down to earth for a moment. You don't have to be a scientist to make good decisions. You just need to understand that every small action has a ripple effect. Choosing to donate instead of dump helps a family in need. Separating waste properly ensures it actually gets recycled. Hiring a licensed, ethical clearance provider protects your legal liability and our shared environment. That's the power of science translated into everyday practice. So the next time you look at a pile of stuff and feel tempted to just get rid, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what's the true cost of disposal? Not just financially, but environmentally, socially, and even emotionally. Up next, we're going to round things off by talking about the bigger picture, the broader lessons we've learned from years of working in clearance. Lessons about people, resilience, and the small decisions that shape our world. We've covered a lot so far: what sustainable clearance is, how we do it, the science behind it, and real-world examples that bring it all to life. But let's take a step back now and reflect on some of the bigger themes, the human, emotional, and even philosophical lessons that emerge when you spend years working in homes, offices, and properties where people have lived, loved, lost, and moved on. Because here's what I've learned after all these years in the field. Clearance work isn't really about stuff. It's about stories. And when you treat it that way, everything changes. Whether it's a bereavement clearance, a hoarding case, or even a tenancy clean out, there's always a story behind the clutter. Someone lived there. Someone loved those things. Even if the items seem broken or worn out or outdated, they mattered to someone. And that's why compassion has to come first. We've walked into homes where grief still lingers in the air, where families are grieving, overwhelmed, or even arguing. Our job isn't just to shift things, it's to bring calm, to listen, and to help. In the most sensitive jobs, we work room by room, item by item, often with clients by our side. Sometimes they just need to talk, sometimes they need to cry, and sometimes they simply need someone to say, "It's all right, we've got this." That kind of work stays with you. It changes how you see your own home, your own memories. It reminds you that clearance isn't the end of a story. It's part of how we honor what came before and create space for what comes next. Let's talk compliance for a moment. I know it's not the sexiest subject, but legal responsibility is a massive part of clearance, and it's one that too many people overlook until it's too late. If you're a landlord, property manager, letting agent, or even just a private homeowner dealing with clearance, you have a duty of care. It's not optional. It's written into the Environmental Protection Act 1990. That means you must ensure your waste is handled properly by a registered waste carrier with the correct paperwork in place. If you don't, and that waste is dumped illegally, you could be prosecuted even if you had no idea where it ended up. I've seen good, honest people hit with fines of £400 to £5,000 because they trusted a cowboy firm that turned out to be fly tippers. So here's the lesson: don't cut corners. Ask for the waste carrier license. Demand a waste transfer note. If someone offers to do it cheap for cash and don't worry about the paperwork, walk away. Because doing it right protects you, and it protects the communities where we live and work. This one's close to my heart. I believe that in every clearance job, we're not just removing waste, we're rediscovering worth. That might be the worth of an item, a vintage camera, a childhood toy, a family heirloom. It might be the worth of a space cleared, refreshed, ready for new memories. And sometimes it's the worth of a person, someone who's been overwhelmed by circumstances and who just needs someone to step in, support them, and help restore a sense of control. We've worked with people at their lowest ebb, widows trying to let go of a shared home, hoarders trying to reclaim their space, landlords facing back-to-back voids. And in those moments, clearance becomes more than a service. It becomes a reset button, a chance to start again. So if you're listening to this right now and feeling overwhelmed by what's ahead, please know this: you're not alone, and the right help can make all the difference. We've touched on this already, but it bears repeating. Your choices matter. Choosing a sustainable clearance provider, choosing to donate rather than dump, choosing to ask the right questions. These things might feel small in the moment, but they ripple outward. That sofa you let go of might keep someone warm this winter. That fridge you recycled might prevent toxic chemicals from leaking into the water table. That proper paperwork might save you from legal headaches down the line. It's all connected. And in a world that often feels out of control, making thoughtful, conscious decisions about how we handle our stuff is a small but powerful way to reclaim a bit of that control. So as we get ready to wrap up today's episode, I want to encourage you, whether you're a professional, a homeowner, or someone just navigating life's transitions, to see clearance not just as a task, but as an opportunity to do things properly, to act responsibly, and to create a bit of positive change in the process. Coming up in just a moment, I'll be wrapping up the episode with a recap of everything we've covered today, a few final thoughts, and how you can take the next step, either with us at SRS or simply by taking what you've learned and applying it in your own world. All right, let's bring it all together. Today, we've explored the world of sustainable clearance. And if you've stayed with me until now, thank you. It's a topic that might not get the spotlight it deserves, but one that touches so many lives in ways both big and small. Let's take a moment to recap what we've covered. We started with a simple yet powerful truth. Clearance is not just about getting rid of things. It's about doing it in a way that protects the environment, respects the people involved, and meets your legal responsibilities. We broke down what sustainable clearance really means, not just in theory, but in practice. We looked at how SRS approaches every clearance job with a plan to reuse, recycle, and minimize waste, while providing compassion and professionalism every step of the way. We explored the UK-specific regulations that shape this work, like the Environmental Protection Act 1990, the Waste, England and Wales, Regulations 2011, and the crucial duty of care that property owners, landlords, and agents must uphold. We shared some powerful real-life stories of bereaved families, vulnerable individuals, corporate clearouts, and even neglected student properties. Stories that show the human side of what we do and how sustainable clearance can genuinely change lives. We unpack the tools and techniques that make it all possible, from segregation crates and PATI testers to digital inventories and waste transfer documentation. And we looked at how those processes align with the law, with safety, and with best practice. We talked science about the materials involved, the emissions avoided, and the innovations changing the game, about how proper recycling reduces carbon impact, and how seemingly small decisions like donating a chair instead of dumping it have big consequences down the line. And then we zoomed out to reflect on the bigger picture. The lessons this work teaches us about compassion, responsibility, and the power of small intentional acts. So what now? Well, if you're listening to this as a landlord, a property manager, or a facilities professional, maybe you've got a property that's about to change hands. Or perhaps you're dealing with a bereavement. Maybe you're downsizing or helping someone move into care. Whatever your situation, if clearance is part of your future, you now know what to look for. Ask the right questions. Is the clearance provider licensed? Can they issue a waste transfer note? Do they offer donation, reuse, and recycling options? Will they treat your situation with care, dignity, and respect? Because clearance is more than a service. It's a responsibility. And that's what we pride ourselves on at SRS, Specialist Remediation Solutions. We don't just clear spaces, we restore them. We help you let go, move forward, and do the right thing in the process. We work across homes, offices, commercial units, council properties, you name it. And whether it's a sensitive hoarding case or a full-scale office strip out, we apply the same values: compliance, compassion, and care. You can find out more about us, the services we offer, and our approach by visiting srsolutions.uk. There you'll find helpful resources, FAQs, blogs, and contact information if you'd like to speak to one of our team directly. If today's episode has helped you think differently about clearance, or if you know someone who's going through a similar situation, please consider sharing this episode with them. You never know what difference it could make. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of the SRS podcast, Unmasking the World of Specialist Cleaning. We've got more insightful, honest, and sometimes surprising conversations coming your way, covering everything from biohazard cleaning and trauma scenes to hoarding, infectious disease control, and more. I'll leave you with this final thought. We live in a world that's constantly moving, constantly discarding, constantly replacing. But the way we deal with what's left behind, that says a lot about us. And so whether you're dealing with the past, preparing for the future, or just trying to do the right thing in the present, choose a path that's sustainable, one that respects the environment, the law, and the people around you. Because at the end of the day, every clearance is a second chance for that old furniture, a second chance for the space you're clearing, and maybe even just a second chance for you. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, take care, and remember, whatever you're facing, you don't have to do it alone.